It's quiet now. If you were to stand on the shores of the Bosporus tonight, just before dawn, when even the gulls sleep, you might hear the city breathe. The wind slides between crumbling arches and forgotten domes, carrying whispers of an empire that refused to die. A city that was once called Nova Roma, then Constantinople, and much later, Istanbul. But long before it became the city we know today, it was the heart of the Byzantine Empire, an empire that somehow survived the fall of Rome, the wrath of Persians, the rise of Islam, the Crusades, the Mongols, and its own endless intrigues. For over 1,000 years it endured, and yet most of the world barely remembers it. Strange, isn't it? Rome gets the glory, the marble statues, the Hollywood treatments. But Byzantium, Rome's shimmering ghost, fades quietly into footnotes. As if an empire that lasted a millennium longer than the Western Roman Empire didn't deserve a little attention. So tonight, let's bring it back. Slowly, quietly. The story begins not in Constantinople, but in Rome in the 4th century CE. Rome, the eternal city, had become a bit tired. Aging emperors, squabbling generals, barbarian raids, and an economy collapsing under its own weight. You could say Rome was a shadow of herself, still grand but fraying at the edges. And amid all that chaos stood Constantine the Great, a man who, by all accounts, refused to accept decline as destiny. He had survived civil wars, assassins, and an empire divided by faith and ambition. But Constantine wasn't just a soldier, he was a visionary. He wanted a Rome reborn, a city untouched by the decay of the old world. And so he looked east, because the east was where the money was. The trade routes, the spices, the silks, all flowed through Asia Minor and the Aegean. Rome might have had history, but the east had opportunity. So Constantine chose a small, ancient Greek city on the Bosporus called Byzantium, nothing more than a fishing town, really, and said, "This will be the new Rome," as if it were that simple. But somehow, it worked.
It's 330 CE. The city of Byzantium is reborn as Constantinopolis, the city of Constantine. Marble from Greece, columns from Rome, statues from across the empire, all hauled here by ship and sweat. The emperor envisions something eternal. Grand walls, imperial palaces, forums, and the great hippodrome, where chariots would thunder for centuries to come. And there, in the center, the emperor erected his column, a towering monument to his new city, crowned with a statue of Apollo, except the face was his own, because of course it was. But Constantinople wasn't just another capital. It was something else entirely. It was the hinge between worlds. Europe and Asia, Christianity and pagan tradition, past and future. A place where Latin and Greek mingled, where merchants spoke in a dozen tongues, and where the scent of incense from distant lands drifted through the morning fog. It was a city that seemed to exist half in reality, half in dream. And for over 1,000 years, it would stand as the beacon of civilization, while the world around it burned. But Constantine's legacy wasn't just architectural. He also changed the spiritual heart of the empire. In 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity, a faith that had once been hunted in shadows and catacombs. Now, the cross would stand beside the eagle. Imagine that transformation. An empire that once worshipped Jupiter and Mars now prayed to the god of a crucified carpenter from Nazareth. It was radical, it was controversial, and, depending on whom you ask, it was brilliant or disastrous. But it worked. Christianity gave the empire a new identity, a moral compass to replace the fading ideals of pagan Rome. And Constantinople became its sacred heart, the New Jerusalem, some called it. The emperor even built a great church, the Hagia Sophia, though not yet the famous domed version we know today, to symbolize divine power on earth. Light filtered through its windows like liquid gold. It was meant to remind the people that God watched over the empire, or at least that the emperor wanted them to believe so. But Constantine's dynasty didn't last. Few in Byzantium ever did.
After Constantine's death in 337, the empire was divided among his sons, because of course it was. Roman tradition practically demanded that power be split in the most inconvenient way possible. And predictably, civil wars followed. Brothers turned against brothers, generals declared themselves emperors, and the grand experiment of a united empire once again began to fracture. By the end of the 4th century, Emperor Theodosius I tried to hold it all together one last time. He was the last man to rule both East and West. But when he died in 395, his two sons inherited two very different worlds. The Western Empire, poor, crumbling, beset by invasions, and the Eastern Empire, wealthy, stable, fortified. The West would fall within a century. Rome itself would be sacked, not once, but several times, until the old imperial flame flickered out in 476. But the East endured. They didn't even call themselves Byzantines. To them, they were still Romans, Romaioi. Their emperor was still the Roman emperor, and their city, Constantinople, was still the capital of the Roman world. The world simply hadn't realized it yet. So there it stood, the Eastern Roman Empire, reborn from the ashes of the old. Greek-speaking now, Christian, yet still Roman in law and ambition. A hybrid civilization, stitched together from the ruins of antiquity and the promises of faith. Over the centuries, it would come to define what it meant to survive. While Europe sank into what we now call the Dark Ages, Constantinople remained a jewel of light, a city of learning, diplomacy, and endless scheming. It was a place where philosophers debated theology as fiercely as generals planned wars, where icons were painted with tears and gold, where emperors plotted, monks prayed, and the people, ever cynical, ever proud, filled the hippodrome to cheer, jeer, and riot, sometimes all at once. Because that was Byzantium, glorious, impossible, fragile, eternal. A civilization that refused to die quietly.
It's the 6th century now. Constantinople stands tall, dazzling, loud, a city wrapped in silk and incense. To travelers from the crumbling West, it must have seemed like another world. Clean streets, mostly, running water, public baths, schools, and palaces that gleamed in the Mediterranean sun. While Europe was busy forgetting how to read, the Byzantines were arguing over theology with footnotes. And above them all, there stood a man with a vision, one of the most ambitious rulers in human history, Emperor Justinian I. Justinian wasn't born to rule. He was the son of Tesens from Illyria, a backwater region of the empire. But he had something most emperors lacked, an impossible belief in destiny. He saw himself not just as an emperor, but as a restorer, the man who would bring back the glory of Rome, the one Constantine had dreamed of centuries before, and he would stop at nothing to make it real. Imagine Justinian in his palace, hunched over maps. Before him, the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, RC, as the Romans once called it. But it wasn't ours anymore. The Western Empire had shattered. Vandals in North Africa, Goths in Italy, Visigoths in Spain. Barbarians, all of them. At least, that's how the Byzantines liked to think of it. To Justinian, this was unacceptable. Rome wasn't supposed to end with a whimper, so in his mind, it hadn't. He would reclaim it, rebuild the old empire piece by piece, city by city, coast by coast. Because why not? He had the money, the army, and most importantly, the stubbornness. But he wouldn't do it alone. Standing beside him was Theodora, his empress, his equal, and perhaps the most remarkable woman in Byzantine history.
Theodora's story sounds like something out of a novel, and the historians of her time weren't quite sure what to do with her. Born to a bearkeeper in the Hippodrome, she spent her youth performing on stage, which, in Byzantine polite society, was about as scandalous as it gets. By all accounts, she was witty, beautiful, and unapologetically ambitious. When she met Justinian, something sparked. Not just romance, but partnership. He saw in her a mind as sharp as his own, and when he became emperor, he made her empress. That alone scandalized the elite. But Theodora didn't care. She wore her crown like armor, and together they ruled a world that wasn't quite ready for them. Justinian might have dreamed of rebuilding Rome, but Theodora's empire was built on survival. When the people of Constantinople rose in revolt, it was she, not Justinian, who kept the throne from burning. It began, as most things in Byzantium did, with sports, specifically the chariot races. In the Hippodrome, thousands gathered to cheer their teams, the blues and the greens. Imagine the frenzy of modern football, then add politics, religion, and imperial corruption, and you've got a typical Byzantine afternoon. In 532 CE, tensions boiled over. The crowd turned on the emperor. What started as shouting became riots. The city burned. The palace itself trembled. And Justinian, terrified, considered fleeing. But Theodora, calm, poised, stopped him. Her words, preserved by the historian Procopius, still echo across time. Royalty is a fine burial shroud. She told him that she would rather die in the purple, the imperial color, than live in exile. It was the kind of line you only say once in a lifetime. And it worked. Justinian stayed, and when his generals, particularly a man named Belisarius, surrounded the rioters in the Hippodrome, they slaughtered them all. 30,000 people, gone in an afternoon. The blood of Constantinople ran down the marble steps, but the empire stood. And from those ashes, Justinian built his legacy. When you walk beneath the dome of the Hagia Sophia, it feels like stepping inside a prayer. Light spills from unseen windows, gold mosaics shimmer like sunlight on water, and the air seems to hum with eternity. That was Justinian's gift, his monument to God and to himself. After the Nika riots, he rebuilt the city almost entirely, and at its heart rose this cathedral, designed by two men, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. Mathematicians, not architects. The result was something the world had never seen. When Justinian stood beneath that vast dome for the first time, legend says he looked up and whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." And maybe for a moment he had. The Hagia Sophia would stand for nearly 15 centuries as the largest church in Christendom, a wonder of stone and faith. It was the very soul of Byzantium, radiant, fragile, eternal. But empires, like domes, eventually crack.
While Constantinople glittered, the empire bled. Justinian's dream of restoration demanded conquest, and conquest demanded gold. So he sent his greatest general, Belisarius, west, first to North Africa to crush the Vandals. And against all odds, he did. In less than a year, the once mighty Vandal kingdom was gone. The Byzantine banners fluttered over Carthage again. Then came Italy, the ancient heart of Rome itself. Belisarius fought the Goths in brutal, endless campaigns. He entered Rome in triumph, but what he found was a ghost, a city of ruins and silence. Still, the Roman eagle flew again over the Forum. For a moment, Justinian had done it. The empire was whole again. Or at least, it looked that way on a map. But every victory came at a cost. Wars drained the treasury, soldiers died in thousands, and the borders of the east began to crack. Persians pressed in from the frontier. The Balkans groaned under barbarian raids, and famine stalked the countryside.
And then, just when things couldn't get worse, the world itself turned against them. In 541 CE, death came to Constantinople, not in the form of armies, but in fleas. The plague of Justinian, carried by ships from Egypt, swept through the empire like a curse. Within a few months, thousands were dying every day. The streets filled with corpses. The city's air, once perfumed with incense, turned to the stench of decay. Procopius, who witnessed it, wrote that the dead were so numerous they were piled in towers and buried in mass graves. Even the emperor himself fell ill, hovering between life and death for days. He recovered. Most did not. By the time it was over, perhaps half of Constantinople was gone. The empire was never quite the same again. And yet, somehow, it endured. Because that's what Byzantium did best. It suffered, rebuilt, and pretended not to notice the cracks.
Amid the wars and plagues, Justinian accomplished something quietly revolutionary. He reformed the law. Centuries of chaotic Roman legislation, contradictory, confusing, sprawling, were gathered, edited, and codified into a single body. The Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. It was meticulous, rational, ambitious, and it would outlive him by centuries. Even modern legal systems, from Europe to Latin America, still echo Justinian's vision of order. So, while his military dreams faded, his laws endured. It's almost poetic, really. His armies could not hold Italy forever, but his words would govern kingdoms yet unborn. By the time Justinian died in 565, the empire was vast on paper, but fragile in truth. The wars had left the treasury drained, the army stretched thin, and the people weary. Belisarius, his loyal general, died in quiet disgrace, falsely accused of corruption, his eyes dimmed with betrayal. Theodora had gone before him, her strength gone, but her legend intact. And Justinian, the great dreamer, left behind an empire that shone brilliantly, but briefly. Still, for all its exhaustion, Byzantium had entered its golden age. Its art gleamed in gold leaf and mosaic. Its theology shaped the course of Christianity itself. In Constantinople, the city of Constantine remained the most magnificent city on earth. When the sun set over the Bosporus, its domes burned like fire. Sailors miles away would see it glow and whisper, "That must be heaven." Music fades into a single haunting note, like a bell tolling over water. So ends the age of Justinian, the builder, the lawgiver, the man who reached for Rome and nearly caught it. His empire survived him, though not without scars. The world was changing. New faiths were rising in the deserts to the south. New enemies stirred in the east. And soon, the Byzantine world would face its greatest test yet, one it could neither conquer nor ignore.
It is the 7th century now. The empire Justinian left behind is still vast, glittering on the surface, fractured underneath. The roads that once carried legions now carry refugees. The gold of the treasury has thinned to dust. And yet, the city, Constantinople, still gleams like a star in the dark. Its walls, triple-layered and towering, still guard the Bosphorus. Behind them, mosaics still catch the morning light, and choirs still chant hymns that echo off marble. But out beyond the horizon, storms are gathering, and they will come fast, and without mercy. Before the rise of new faiths, the Byzantines faced an old enemy, one nearly as ancient as themselves, the Sassanid Persian Empire, proud, rich, and relentless. For centuries, the two giants had danced their deadly waltz, Rome and Persia, East and Easter, each claiming divine favor, each calling the other barbarian. And now, the dance began again. In the early 600s, war exploded across the Near East. Persian armies poured into Byzantine lands, swift and merciless. They seized Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, the empire's breadbasket. Jerusalem fell in 614, and with it, a relic said to be the true cross, taken as a trophy back to Persia. To the Byzantines, this wasn't just defeat, it was sacrilege. Constantinople trembled. The emperor at the time, Heraclius, inherited not a throne but a corpse. The empire was broke, the army in tatters, the people despondent. There were even whispers that perhaps God had abandoned them. Heraclius, however, did not agree. In 622, Heraclius took the fight to Persia, not from the comfort of the capital, but at the front lines, leading his men across Anatolia into the frozen heights of Armenia. It was a desperate gamble, but it worked. Year after year, he struck back. Through blizzards, ambushes, and exhaustion, he cut deep into Persian territory. By 627, he stood outside Nineveh, the ancient heart of empire's past, and won a decisive victory. The Persian king was overthrown. Peace followed. The true cross was returned to Jerusalem. The old world seemed, for a moment, restored. But as Heraclius marched home in triumph, the desert wind whispered another name, Islam, and the world was about to change forever.
When the Byzantine soldiers first heard of the Arabs, they did not worry. They were desert raiders, they said. Nomads, little more than a nuisance. But these raiders carried something new, a faith born in the heart of Arabia, in the revelations of a man named Muhammad. They carried unity, conviction, and speed. In 636, just 9 years after Heraclius' victory, the Byzantine army met the Muslim forces on the banks of the Yarmouk River. The Byzantines outnumbered them. They had cavalry, armor, experience. And yet, they were crushed. It wasn't just a battle, it was a turning point. Within a few decades, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and Mesopotamia were lost forever. The empire that had once ruled the Mediterranean now found its heartland reduced to the Balkans and Anatolia. The loss was staggering. Whole provinces, gone, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. And yet, through it all, Constantinople endured. Because as long as the city stood, Byzantium lived. It was 674 when the first great Arab siege began. The city faced the full might of the new Islamic Caliphate, fleets from Egypt and Syria surrounding its harbors, armies pressing from the land. For years they attacked. The Byzantines fought back with a weapon as strange as it was terrifying: Greek fire. No one knows exactly what it was, perhaps a mix of oil, resin, and saltpeter, but it burned even on water. Imagine the night sky over the Bosporus, the sea aflame, ships collapsing into molten waves, the screams of men swallowed by fire. It was horror and salvation. The defenders held out. The siege was broken, and the empire lived to see another dawn. Heraclius' successors celebrated, though the truth was plain. Byzantium had become smaller, harder, sharper. It could no longer dream of empire. It could only fight for survival. And for centuries, that would be its art form.
War was one thing, but Byzantium's greatest battles were often with itself. You see, this was an empire of faith, but faith, as it turns out, is not simple. From the earliest days, theologians debated questions most people would never think to ask. Was Christ human? Divine? Both? And if both, in what proportion? The councils of bishops gathered, argued, condemned, and split. Doctrines rose and fell like empires. And behind it all, emperors meddled, because of course they did. In the 8th century, the empire descended into what historians now call the iconoclast controversy. Literally, the breaking of images. some believed that the veneration of icons, holy images of Christ and the saints, was idolatry, a sin against God. Others saw them as sacred, as the windows through which heaven touched earth. And so, emperors began destroying them. Monks hid them. Riots broke out. Families divided. For over 100 years, Byzantium tore itself apart over paint and prayer. You might think that's absurd, but remember, in Byzantium, theology wasn't just religion. It was politics, identity, eternity. To lose the argument was to lose your soul. Even amid these internal storms, the empire adapted. It always did. The loss of the rich eastern provinces forced the Byzantines to reinvent themselves. Gone were the grand legions of Rome. In their place rose the theme system, military provinces led by local commanders, soldiers who farmed their own land in exchange for defending it. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. The new Byzantium was leaner, tougher, and far more disciplined. From these reforms rose a series of soldier emperors, men of the frontier who knew the rhythm of war better than courtly ritual. They repelled invasions, rebuilt fortresses, and slowly, painfully stabilized the empire's borders. It wasn't glory, but it was survival. And in Byzantium, that counted as victory.
And then came Empress Irene, a name half remembered but worth recalling. In a world ruled by men, Irene seized power in her own right. She blinded her own son to keep the throne because, well, it was Byzantium. And then, perhaps seeking redemption, she called a council in 787 that ended the iconoclast madness. Icons were restored, the people rejoiced, and for a fleeting moment, the empire remembered how to breathe again. It's strange. She's often painted as ruthless, but Irene's reign reminds us that cruelty and piety often shared a throne in Byzantium. Faith could bless the sword just as easily as it could forgive it. By the end of the 8th century, the empire had shrunk, but its culture shone brighter than ever. The Byzantines became masters of endurance and of beauty. Their art gleamed with gold and sorrow. Their scholars preserved the works of Plato and Aristotle while the West slept. Their monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, each letter an act of defiance against forgetting. And Constantinople, though smaller now, remained the envy of the world. Its markets brimmed with silk and spices, its walls still unbroken. Its people, proud and weary, joked that even if the world ended, Constantinople would go on haggling over the price of olive oil. Because that was Byzantium, eternal not by force, but by habit. A civilization too stubborn to die, too clever to rest, too haunted to be simple. And so, as the 9th century dawned, the empire stood again, battered but alive. It had faced the Persians, the Arabs, the plague, and its own demons. And still it endured. But beyond the horizon, a new kind of power was rising. Not in the deserts or the steppes, but in the far frozen north. And soon the Byzantines would find new allies, new enemies, and a new world to teach, or perhaps to lose.
It's the 9th century now. The empire that once called itself Roman has been through fire. Plagues, invasions, iconoclasm, betrayal. It has shrunk to a shadow of its former self. And yet, the shadow gleams. Constantinople still stands, as it always does. The city's domes catch the sunrise like golden shields. Its markets hum with voices, Greek, Armenian, Slavic, Arabic, and tongues that have no name in history. Ships glide across the Bosphorus, bearing silk, spices, furs, and gossip from 3 continents. And somewhere in the great palace, the emperor sharpens his pen as much as his sword. Because now begins one of Byzantium's strangest miracles, its rebirth. In 867, a new dynasty rose, the Macedonians. Not
Macedonians like Alexander the Great, these were from a rugged frontier of the empire, born of soldiers, peasants, and ambition. Their founder, Basil I, was said to have risen from stable boy to emperor, a story so perfect you'd swear a poet made it up. He was strong, cunning, and charming, dangerously so. He caught the eye of Emperor Michael III, became his favorite, and then, well, let's just say the friendship ended badly. Michael was found dead after a hunting accident, and Basil emerged as emperor, because, of course, this was Byzantium. Basil's reign marked the start of something rare, a century of strength, stability, and intellectual revival. The empire would expand, its culture would flourish, and Constantinople would once again be the beating heart of the civilized world.
Basil's successors saw themselves not merely as rulers, but as guardians of civilization. They revived education, rebuilt libraries, and filled the monasteries with scribes who copied ancient texts by candlelight, not just religious works, but Aristotle, Homer, Euclid. In quiet scriptoria, monks preserved the wisdom of Greece and Rome for a future that hadn't yet been born. Without Byzantium, much of the ancient world would have vanished entirely. The capital became a living museum of thought, where theology, philosophy, and politics mixed like spices in the Grand Bazaar. And yet, even amid all that intellect, there remained the old Byzantine paradox: beauty and cruelty, faith and scheming, gold leaf and blood. Two names define this era of light: Leo VI, known as the Wise, though his personal life was anything but, and Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, the born in the purple. Leo was a poet emperor, a philosopher who codified laws and wrote sermons between love affairs. He was married 4 times, which for an emperor was excessive even by Byzantine standards. His 4th marriage scandalized the church, but it produced an heir, Constantine VII, who would become one of the most erudite rulers in all of history. Constantine wasn't much of a warrior. He preferred ink to iron, manuscripts to campaigns. His court became a haven for scholars and artists. He wrote manuals on court ceremony, foreign policy, and imperial conduct, detailed guides on how an emperor should rule, dress, and even breathe. To him, the empire was more than a kingdom. It was a performance, a divine play in which every role, from emperor to stable boy, had meaning. If Rome was muscle, Byzantium was memory, and Constantine VII made sure that memory would never fade.
But this wasn't an age of peace alone. Under the Macedonians, Byzantium rediscovered its military might. Generals like Nicephorus Phocas and John Themistokles became legends, names whispered with awe even by their enemies. They reclaimed lands lost to the Arabs, pushing the frontier deep into Syria and Mesopotamia. Cities that had been under the Crescent banner for centuries once again rang with church bells. And in the West, imperial influence stretched back into Italy and the Balkans. For the first time in hundreds of years, the empire felt secure, its borders strong, its treasury full, its armies feared. The world looked on Constantinople, its shining walls, its domes of gold, and thought, perhaps the Romans have risen again. But Byzantium's power wasn't only in armies, it was in faith. And faith, the Byzantines knew, could conquer where swords failed. To the north, in the frozen lands of the Slavs, new peoples were rising, wild, fierce, hungry for power and legitimacy. One of them was the Rus, a loose confederation of Vikings and Slavs who ruled from the rivers that flowed toward the Black Sea. Their ruler, Prince Vladimir of Kiev, wanted a religion to unite his people and, more importantly, to impress his neighbors. So he sent envoys to study the faiths of the world. They visited the mosques of the Caliphate, the churches of the West, and finally, the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. When they returned, they told him, "We did not know whether we were in heaven or on earth." And that was that. Vladimir converted to Christianity, Byzantine Christianity.
He married a Byzantine princess, and his people were baptized in the waters of the Dnieper River. The faith spread like sunlight over snow. Icons, liturgies, and architecture all flowed north. The Orthodox world was born, and Byzantium became its mother. It's strange to think, while the empire itself would one day fade, its faith would endure from the Balkans to Siberia, from the Danube to the Pacific. Byzantium's greatest conquest was not land, it was souls.
By the 10th century, Constantinople was the envy of the world. 1 million people lived within its walls, more than any city on earth. Its markets overflowed with silk, jewels, spices, perfumes, even snow shipped from the mountains for summer feasts. Scholars debated theology under the arcades while children chased pigeons in the squares. Its harbor, the Golden Horn, glittered with ships from every corner of the known world. Visitors from the Latin West called it God's earthly paradise. Arab travelers described it as the eye of the world. Even the Vikings called it Miklagard, the great city. It was said that all roads, whether by land or sea, eventually led to Constantinople. And at its heart stood the Hagia Sophia, still towering, still radiant, its dome seeming to float on air. Inside, the mosaics glowed like molten stars. The city was more than capital. It was symbol, myth, legend made flesh. But Byzantium, in its brilliance, began to forget one of its oldest lessons. Nothing gold stays. As the 11th century dawned, cracks began to appear. Success breeds complacency, and Byzantium had grown comfortable, perhaps too much so. Court intrigues multiplied like weeds in marble courtyards. Generals and bureaucrats quarreled, eunuchs whispered in the palace corridors, and gold flowed more readily into ceremonies than into armies. Meanwhile, new enemies gathered at the borders. From the steppes came the Pechenegs and Bulgars, testing the empire's northern frontiers. But from the east came something far more dangerous, the Seljuk Turks. Nomads turned conquerors, hardened by desert and faith. They struck with terrifying speed, cutting into Byzantine territory like a blade through silk. The emperor's armies, bloated with politics and pride, stumbled. The empire still glittered, but the light had shifted. It was the hour before twilight, though no one yet realized it. For now, Byzantium still shone. The mosaics still sparkled, the scholars still wrote, the bells still rang. The city of Constantine had survived 1,000 years, but the world outside was changing faster than the empire could understand. Beyond the mountains, crusaders were stirring, and beyond the deserts, the Turks were watching. The empire that had outlived Rome itself was about to face the sharp edge of history once more.
There's something eerily poetic about the way empires die. They never fall in one clean stroke, not like in the stories. They decay, quietly, like candle wax melting in its own light. The Byzantines had known this truth better than most. For centuries, they'd survived the impossible. Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, plagues, crusades of ideology and greed. But the next chapters, they would test even Byzantium's stubborn talent for survival. Because by the late 11th century, the empire stood at a crossroads, powerful in memory, but fragile in reality. And the storm that would sweep across its marble streets was already gathering beyond the eastern horizon. It's the year 1071, and Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes marches east. His army is grand, proud, and fractured. It's a patchwork of mercenaries, feudal levies, and old soldiers, Greeks, Normans, Franks, Armenians. A mismatched orchestra, all playing slightly out of tune. He rides toward Manzikert, a dusty fortress near Lake Van, to face a rising power, the Seljuk Turks, led by Alp Arslan, whose name means heroic lion. The Seljuks were new to the imperial stage. Nomads turned conquerors, swift and merciless. They didn't march like Romans, they swarmed. The two armies met under a blazing Anatolian sun. At first, the Byzantines held strong, but confusion spread. Some generals defected, others fled, and when the dust cleared, the emperor, the Roman emperor, was a prisoner in Turkish hands. Alp Arslan treated him kindly. He even released him, ransomed rather than executed. But the damage was done. Manzikert shattered Byzantine control over Anatolia, the empire's heartland, its breadbasket, its backbone. Towns were abandoned, armies evaporated. The Turks poured in like floodwater through a broken dam. An empire that had once ruled from Spain to Syria now trembled to defend its own backyard.
But Byzantium was nothing if not resilient. Even as the empire teetered, a new family rose to seize the reins, the Komnenoi. And at their head stood one of the most capable rulers Byzantium ever produced, Alexios I Komnenos. Alexios was no fool. He knew his empire was bleeding from every vein, so he did something bold, and perhaps desperate. He reached out to the West, to the Latin Christian kingdoms of Europe. He sent envoys to Rome, to the Pope himself, asking for aid against the Turks. Now, you might think that sounds reasonable. A Christian empire appealing to other Christians. But between East and West, there was a chasm of theology, pride, and language. The churches had split not long before, in the Great Schism of 1054, when Rome and Constantinople officially excommunicated each other. So when Alexios sent his plea, he was playing with fire. And in 1095, that fire caught. When Pope Urban II called for a great crusade to free the Holy Land from Muslim control, he didn't just send an army, he unleashed a movement. Tens of thousands answered the call, knights, peasants, priests, vagabonds, all marching under the cross. Many didn't even make it past the Balkans. They looted, burned, and occasionally forgot who the infidels actually were. By the time the First Crusade reached Constantinople, Alexios realized his request for help had turned into an invasion of well-armed pilgrims with questionable discipline. Still, Alexios played the diplomat. He ferried them across the Bosphorus, fed them, guided them, and tried very hard not to let them sack his city. In return, the Crusaders promised to restore any lands they recaptured to Byzantine control. Surprisingly, it worked. The Crusaders carved their way through Anatolia, took Antioch, and eventually Jerusalem. Byzantium regained parts of its lost territory. For a moment, it seemed the empire might yet breathe again. But anyone who's ever made a deal with the West in Byzantine history knows those debts always come due.
The Komnenian era became a kind of second wind. Alexios' son, John II, was a quiet genius, pious, thoughtful, and effective. He rebuilt the army, strengthened the economy, and ruled with rare humility. He was, quite possibly, one of the most decent men to ever sit the Byzantine throne, which might explain why no one remembers him as vividly as his son. Manuel I Komnenos was everything his father wasn't: dazzling, impulsive, charming to a fault. He loved tournaments, foreign fashions, Latin diplomats. He saw himself as a universal monarch, emperor not just of Byzantium but of Christendom itself. Under Manuel, the empire looked magnificent again. Byzantine gold funded alliances and wars from Italy to Egypt. But that gold, like the empire's patience, was running thin. Manuel's campaigns drained the treasury, and his love of grandeur began to outpace his victories. Still, for a while, Constantinople glittered once more, its harbor full of ships, its palaces alive with music, the scent of incense and ambition in the air. But while the emperors dreamed of unity, the West dreamed of profit.
Trade had always been Byzantium's lifeblood, and now Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa began to dominate it. They negotiated trade privileges that strangled the empire's own merchants. Venetian ships filled the Golden Horn, their flags fluttering like unwelcome guests. And when Manuel died in 180, the empire's fragile balance died with him. His successors were weak. The court descended into factionalism. The army, underpaid and overworked, began to crumble again. Outside the walls, enemies circled: the Turks, the Normans, and, most ominously, the Crusaders. The Fourth Crusade was already being whispered about in candlelit chapels and royal courts, a crusade that would make the Holy Land seem very far away indeed.
It's hard to overstate the absurdity of what came next. In 1204, a crusade meant to attack Muslim Egypt somehow ended up attacking Constantinople, a Christian city. The excuse? Politics, debts, and a little Venetian manipulation. The Crusaders, broke and restless, owed money to Venice for their ships. The Venetians, ever practical, offered a solution: help us conquer a few ports, pay us later. But things spiraled, as they tend to do in history. A disputed succession in Byzantium gave them their pretext. Soon, the greatest Christian city in the world found itself besieged, not by Saracens, but by men who called themselves brothers in faith. The siege was brutal. The walls that had defied 1,000 enemies finally cracked, and when they fell, the Queen of Cities was sacked like any pagan stronghold. Churches were looted, icons smashed, relics stolen. The Hagia Sophia, that sacred dome of light, was desecrated. A prostitute was said to have danced on the altar while crusaders drank from chalices of stolen gold. For 3 days, the city burned. When it was over, the Byzantine Empire was gone. In its place stood the Latin Empire of Constantinople, a feeble puppet state ruled by Western lords who barely understood what they had destroyed. Venice took its share, treasures, islands, trade routes, and smiled. It was one of the most tragic, ironic moments in all of history. The Christian world had devoured itself. And yet, Byzantium refused to vanish. From the ashes rose fragments, successor states: Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond. The Empire of Nicaea, ruled by the Lascarid dynasty, carried the torch of legitimacy. Its rulers rebuilt schools, armies, and faith. Quietly, steadily, like monks restoring a ruined cathedral. 57 years after the sack in 1261, Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople. The Byzantines had returned. The city was a ruin, the empire a shadow, but they were home. It was, in a sense, a miracle, but also perhaps a cruel one, because the Byzantines were no longer the masters of their age, just survivors in a world that had moved on. The centuries that followed would be long and sorrowful. The empire would cling to life through diplomacy, faith, and sheer stubbornness. It would still send ambassadors, mint coins, crown emperors, but the cracks ran deep, and the world outside was shifting again, toward gunpowder, toward new empires, toward an age that no longer had room for the Romans of the East. The Queen of Cities would rise once more in name, but her crown was already tarnished.
There are moments in history that feel more like dreams than events. Too poetic, too cruel, too perfect in their symmetry. The fall of Constantinople is one of those moments. It's not just the end of a city or a dynasty, it's the end of a world. Imagine it. May 28th, 1453. The air is heavy with dust and candle smoke. The sea is restless, the wind cold. The walls of Constantinople, those ancient, indestructible walls, still stand, cracked but proud. Behind them, the last emperor of Rome crazed by candlelight. Outside, waiting in the dark, stands the future.
His name was Constantine the 11th Paleologos. Yes, Constantine, like the first. History has a taste for irony. He was not born to grandeur. He had no great army, no fleet, no treasury. What he did have was something rarer: quiet courage. He ruled a kingdom of ghosts, a few scattered towns, broken fortresses, and the city itself, Constantinople. But to the Byzantines, the city was the empire. As long as its domes still caught the sunrise, they were still Romans. And now, the sun was setting. Outside the walls, an army of over 80,000 men waited. Ottoman Turks under their young and relentless sultan, Mehmed II. He was only 21, brilliant, ruthless, visionary. He had inherited not just an empire, but a mission: to take the city his ancestors had dreamed of, to seize the heart of the world. By the spring of 1453, Constantinople was a memory of itself. Once home to 1 million souls, it now sheltered barely 50,000. Its harbors were half empty, its palaces crumbled into ruins, haunted by cats and echoes. But it was still beautiful, always beautiful. The Hagia Sophia still towered over the skyline, its dome gleaming faintly even under gray skies. Its mosaics, gold, sapphire, and crimson, still shimmered by candlelight. The streets still curved as they had in Roman times, winding past cisterns, forums, and fountains that had survived 1,000 winters. The people, merchants, monks, soldiers, widows, moved like sleepwalkers through a city that refused to die. They patched the walls with stones and hope. They prayed, fasted, and waited. And at night, they could hear the drums, thousands of them, rolling from the Ottoman camps beyond the Theodosian walls, a heartbeat made of thunder. On April 6th, the Ottoman army arrived. They surrounded the city by land and sea. The Golden Horn, that sheltered inlet, was protected by a great chain stretched across its mouth, a final defiance. Inside, the defenders numbered barely 7,000 men. 7,000 against tens of thousands. They were Greeks, Venetians, Genoese, and even a few mercenaries from the West who had drifted in seeking redemption or coin. Their leader, beside the emperor, was a Genoese captain named Giovanni Giustiniani, a professional soldier with the kind of confidence born from far too many battles. The Turks brought with them a new kind of terror: cannon, massive bronze monsters forged by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. One of them, the Great Bombard, could fire a stone ball weighing over half a ton. It took dozens of oxen to move and hours to reload, but when it fired, the ground shook, and the walls, those walls that had defied Persians, Arabs, and Crusaders, began to crumble. Every day, Mehmed's men battered the defenses. Every night, the Byzantines rebuilt them. It was a grim ritual, a dance of defiance and exhaustion. For weeks, the sky over the city glowed with fire. Smoke rose from the siege lines like incense to some ancient god of war, and all the while, the sea remained quiet, a vast, indifferent witness. Mehmed watched from his command tent. He studied the city like a scholar studying a text. He knew its history, its myths, its weaknesses. He believed himself chosen by destiny, the one who would succeed where centuries of conquerors had failed. He had the harbor blockaded, but one obstacle remained: the chain across the Golden Horn. So he did the impossible. He ordered ships dragged over land. Using logs, grease, and sheer determination, hundreds of Ottoman vessels were hauled over the hills north of the city and slid down into the Golden Horn behind the Byzantine fleet. When the defenders awoke the next morning and saw Turkish sails inside their own harbor, it was as if the laws of the world had broken. Panic spread. The defenders fought on, but the noose had tightened. By late May, the city was dying. Food was scarce. Water ran low. The walls were barely holding, but the people still gathered in the Hagia Sophia for one last service. Emperor Constantine came, dressed not in armor, but in robes of state, purple and gold. Beside him stood priests, monks, and citizens, Greek and Latin alike, their centuries of division washed away by the shadow of doom. They prayed together. They wept. Some said the dome glowed with unearthly light that night, as if heaven itself had descended to witness its own reflection. When the service ended, Constantine turned to his men and said quietly, "The hour has come when we must all die for our faith and our country." He took off his crown, he left the church, and he went to the walls. The last night of Byzantium was eerily calm. A strange peace hung over the city, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to fear. Soldiers stood along the ramparts, their faces ghostly in the torchlight. Some prayed, some sharpened their swords. Some simply stared out at the vast black plain beyond the walls, where thousands of Ottoman campfires flickered like stars fallen to earth. In the streets below, mothers held their children close. Monks chanted psalms until their voices cracked, and somewhere, deep within the palace, someone lit one last candle in a window that would never be seen again. At dawn, May 29, 1453, Mehmed gave the signal. The sky was pale gray, streaked with smoke. Waves of soldiers surged against the walls, first the irregulars, then the Anatolians, then the elite Janissaries. Justiniani was wounded early, a cannon fragment to the chest. When he was carried from the walls, panic spread among the defenders. Still, Constantine fought on. He threw aside his imperial regalia and fought as a simple soldier. Some say his last words were, "The city is fallen, but I am still alive." Others say he simply vanished into the crush, lost among his men, his body never found. The Turks poured through the breaches, flags rose above the walls, the gate of St. Romanus fell, and by mid-morning the city was theirs. The queen of cities, the fortress of faith, the last heir of Rome, was silent. When Mehmed entered the city, he rode straight to the Hagia Sophia. The great church was filled with terrified refugees, men, women, children huddled beneath mosaics of saints. The Sultan ordered them unharmed. He dismounted, picked up a handful of dust and let it fall through his fingers. And then, softly, he said, "What a city we have given over to plunder and destruction." He entered the church, looked up at the dome and whispered a prayer. Then he ordered it to be cleansed and consecrated as a mosque. Outside, the banners of the crescent rose above the skyline where the cross had stood for 1,000 years. The echoes of bells faded, and for the first time since Constantine the Great, no Roman emperor lived to see another dawn. But perhaps Byzantium never really fell, not completely. Its language, Greek, still flows through prayers and songs. Its faith endures, from the monasteries of Mount Athos to the cathedrals of Moscow. Its art, its mosaics, its theology, its stubborn love of beauty, all these drifted westward, carried by refugees who would help ignite the Renaissance. When we read Plato, when we gaze at domes of gold, when we cross ourselves from right to left, we still walk in Byzantium's long shadow. And if you listen closely, in some forgotten midnight church, you can almost hear it, the echo of choirs long gone, the faint hum of a city that once believed it could outlast the world.
The Empire of Byzantium lasted over 1,000 years, born from the ashes of Rome, surviving fire, plague, and betrayal. It lived through every kind of death, except the final one, until even time itself grew tired. But in its fall, it became eternal, because history, after all, never forgets a good story, and Byzantium was one of the best.
History often ends with silence, but silence too has a voice, and sometimes it whispers across the centuries. The story of Byzantium didn't end in 1453. It simply changed its shape. Like a river disappearing underground, it still flows beneath the surface of the modern world. When the last Roman emperor fell, his empire lived on, not in stone or armies, but in memory, language, and faith. The scholars who fled west carried with them Greek manuscripts, Plato, Aristotle, Homer, books the West had forgotten, and ideas that would soon ignite the Renaissance. The light of Byzantium, refracted through Florence and Venice, would become the light of modern Europe. Its faith spread north and east, to the Slavs and the Rus. From the monasteries of Mount Athos to the cathedrals of Moscow, the cross of Byzantium rose again, shining with gold and incense. And its art, the shimmering mosaics, the domes that seem to float on air, the hymns that sound like eternity, still move us, even when we no longer speak the language they were written in. What was Byzantium really? A state? A church? A dream? For 1,000 years it stood between two worlds, the East and the West, the ancient and the medieval, the human and the divine. It was an empire that believed itself eternal, that saw no border between heaven and earth. To its people, the emperor was not just a ruler, he was the reflection of God's order on earth. The palace was a mirror of the cosmos. Every ritual, every hymn, every candle, a reenactment of creation itself. It was perhaps the last world that truly believed in the sacredness of everything. Byzantium teaches us strange lessons. It reminds us that power can endure long after wealth and armies fade, that beauty, faith, and intellect can hold a civilization together when politics cannot. But it also warns us. It shows how pride, division, and fear of change can turn even a golden empire into a gilded tomb. In its brilliance, we see humanity's greatest heights. In its fall, our oldest flaw, the belief that tomorrow will always come.
Sometimes when we look at old mosaics, when we see light fall through a church dome, or when a choir sings in the language no one speaks anymore, we catch a glimpse of Byzantium, alive, still shimmering just beyond reach. Perhaps that's its true immortality. Not in its walls, not in its emperors, but in the feeling it left behind, that blend of awe and melancholy, of grandeur and fragility. Because Byzantium, in the end, was not only a place, it was an idea, that beauty could be divine, that truth could be eternal, that the world could be sacred. And though the empire fell, the idea never did. Today, the domes of Hagia Sophia still rise over Istanbul. They have seen empires come and go. Faiths change, flags rise and fall. But the stones remember. The air still hums with the echoes of ancient choirs, and the walls still glow its sunset as if painted by heaven itself. The Byzantines believed that light was the language of God, that when it touched gold, it made eternity visible. And maybe as long as light still falls on those mosaics, Byzantium has never truly gone. We like to think history moves forward, that empires fall and new ones rise. But maybe history just circles back, like the domes of Constantinople, forever curving toward heaven. Byzantium is gone, and yet it is everywhere.